Elara was the quiet poetry in the loud, chaotic prose of Liam's life. To him, she was not just a wife, she was a sanctuary. He moved through a world of sharp edges and brutal negotiations, a world that demanded a certain hardness. But when he came home, the front door closing behind him was a gateway to a softer reality, one curated entirely by her. Elara existed in the gentle hum of their home, in the scent of jasmine and freshly baked bread, in the warm glow of the lamp she always left on for him. Her love was a tangible thing, a devotion so pure and unwavering that it washed away the grime of his day. She would listen for hours as he spoke of corporate conquests and rivalries, her hand resting softly on his arm, her eyes reflecting a profound understanding he felt he did not deserve. She was the keeper of his better self, the part of him that still believed in goodness. In her presence, his jagged ambitions smoothed into simple contentment. She was gentle, almost fragile in her kindness, and her every action was an ode to him. He was the sun her world orbited, and she, in turn, was the light that chased away his darkness. He called her his angel, a term he used so often it became a second name. And he believed it. He believed she was a celestial creature sent to save him from himself, her love and unconditional grace he had somehow earned. He never once considered that angels, when they fall, do not simply break, they burn. Liam wore his wife's love like a medal of honor. At client dinners and weekend barbecues with friends, he would steer the conversation toward Elara, his voice thick with a proprietary pride. A man is only as successful as the woman behind him, he'd declare, draping an arm around her shoulder, and in that regard, I'm the wealthiest man in this city. His friends would laugh, their wives smiling politely, but Liam was deadly serious. He saw her devotion not as a precious gift to be cherished, but as an asset, the most valuable in his portfolio. She was proof of his worth. Her unwavering loyalty, her gentle nature, her complete focus on his happiness, these were testaments to his power, his ability to command even the purest of hearts. "She'd do anything for me," he boasted to his business partner, Mark, over whiskey one evening. "It's a rare thing, a woman like that. No ambition of her own beyond making a good home. She's content. She'll never leave." He believed this with an unshakable certainty. In his mind, their life was a kingdom of his own making, and Elara was its perfect, placid queen, content to rule the domestic sphere while he conquered the world outside. He saw her love as a constant, an immutable law of his universe. It never occurred to him that even the most steadfast constants have a breaking point, or that the foundation he was so proud of was built not on his strength, but on a trust he was beginning to take for granted. He was a fortunate man, and he knew it, but his fortune had made him careless. The first crack in Elara's perfect world was almost imperceptible, a hairline fracture in the porcelain of her trust. It began with sound. The hushed tone of Liam's voice when he took a call in another room, the soft click of the door closing when it had always been left open. Before, his phone was an extension of their shared life, left casually on the kitchen counter. Now, it was always screened down, an opaque black rectangle guarding its secrets. Then came the scents, a faint trace of a floral perfume, sharp and unfamiliar, clinging to his suit jacket when he came home late from a networking dinner. When she mentioned it, burying her face in his chest, he laughed it off. Must have been Karen from accounting. She practically bathes in the stuff. But his laugh was a little too quick, his embrace a little too tight, as if to physically hold her suspicions at bay. Strange absences began to punctuate their routine. A Saturday morning meeting that had never happened before. A last-minute business trip to a city he'd just returned from. He had answers for everything, plausible and smooth, but they didn't quite settle in her heart. They sat on the surface, slick like oil on water. It wasn't a single event but an accumulation of tiny dissonances, a melody played slightly out of key. The man who had shared every detail of his life was now editing the narrative. A small, cold seed of doubt was planted in the warm soil of her love, and Elara, who had only ever known how to nurture, felt its unwelcome roots begin to take hold. The hairline fractures widened into visible cracks. Liam's performance, once flawless, grew sloppy. The mask of the devoted husband began to slip, revealing glimpses of the stranger beneath. The carelessness was born of arrogance, a belief that his angel would never possess the capacity for suspicion. He'd mention a new restaurant he loved, then freeze when Alara asked when they had gone there together, backtracking with a clumsy excuse about a lunch meeting. Credit card statements, once left on his desk for her to file, were now whisked away before she could see them. But she saw a receipt that fell from his coat pocket, a charge for 2 cocktails at a hotel bar on a Tuesday night he was supposedly working late at the office. The affection, too, became a performance. Kisses that once lingered now barely brushed her cheek, his mind clearly elsewhere. He grew critical, his praise replaced by faint, cutting remarks about her dress, the dinner she'd made, the way she arranged the flowers. It was as if finding fault in her justified his actions to himself. The most damning evidence came from his car's navigation system. Curious about his new commute to the satellite office, she checked the recent destinations. There, stored in the history, was an address in a residential area across town, visited multiple times a week. It was a place she had never been, a part of a life she was not included in. The cracks were no longer just in their marriage. They were spreading through the very foundation of who she believed her husband to be. The need to know became a physical ache, a gnawing hunger that eclipsed all else. Alara had never been a suspicious person. Her nature was to trust, to believe. But the woman she was becoming had learned the art of observation, and now she would learn the art of investigation. One Thursday evening, when Liam called to say he was stuck in an all-night strategy session, she did something the old Alara would have found unimaginable. She got in her car and drove to the address from the navigation history. It was a modern apartment building with glass balconies and manicured hedges. She parked across the street, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, feeling like a stranger in her own skin. For 2 hours, she sat in the dark, watching, waiting for a sign that would either confirm her fears or send her home in shame. And then she saw it. Liam's car pulled into the guest parking. He got out, not looking tired and stressed from work, but relaxed, smiling. A moment later, the building's front door opened, and a woman with long, dark hair emerged. She ran into his arms, and he kissed her with a passion Alara hadn't felt in years. It wasn't a friendly greeting. It was a lover's embrace, intimate and deeply familiar. The stolen affection, the lies, the secret life, it all coalesced in that one brutal image. The world didn't spin. It simply stopped. In the suffocating silence of her car, Alara watched the man she loved walk into another woman's home, and the truth settled not in her mind, but in her bones, a cold, heavy weight that would anchor her to a new and terrible purpose. The drive home was a blur of streetlights and hollow shock. She walked through the front door of her own home, their home, and saw it for what it was, a stage. A beautifully decorated set for a play in which she had been the unknowing lead actress. Every framed photo on the wall, a monument to a lie. Every gift he'd given her, a token of his guilt. The love she had nurtured in this house, the pure, all-consuming devotion she had felt for Liam, did not fade away gracefully. It shattered. The sound was deafeningly silent, an implosion in her soul that left nothing but a vacuum. She stood before the hallway mirror and stared at her reflection. The eyes that stared back were not the soft, loving eyes of his angel. They were empty, stripped of their light, reflecting only the cold, hard reality of his betrayal. The grief was a physical presence, a giant's hand squeezing her heart, but beneath it, something else was stirring. A frigid calm, a clarity so sharp it cut through the pain. The Alara who believed in forgiveness, who would have cried and pleaded, was gone. She had been murdered on that dark street, watching a kiss that was not for her. In her place stood a survivor, a woman forged in the fires of deceit. The angel was dead. Her wings had been torn from her back, not by a fall from grace, but by the casual cruelty of the man she was sworn to protect. And in the silent, hollowed-out space where her love once resided, a single, unyielding thought took root: vengeance. When Liam came home the next morning, smelling faintly of another woman's soap and feigning exhaustion from his all-night session, Ilara greeted him with a gentle smile. She poured him a cup of coffee, listening with serene patience as he recounted a detailed, fictional account of boardroom battles and strategic breakthroughs. The storm raged within her, a hurricane of betrayal and fury, but her face was a placid lake. Her transformation was an internal one, invisible to the man who believed he knew her so completely. He saw his devoted angel, concerned and comforting. He had no idea he was looking into the eyes of his executioner. Her pain, once a paralyzing force, had crystallized into purpose. She was no longer a wife, she was a strategist. She began to watch him with a new, terrifying clarity, her observations untainted by love. She studied his habits, his vanities, his insecurities. She noted the way he preened when his boss praised him, the slight panic in his eyes when he discussed finances, his absolute dependence on his public image. She was gathering intelligence, mapping out the vulnerabilities of her enemy. Her silence became her greatest weapon. He mistook her calm for acceptance, her gentle touches for forgiveness. He grew bolder in his deceit, believing he had weathered a small storm of suspicion and returned to safe harbor. He didn't realize the harbor was mined, and that the woman smiling at him across the breakfast table was the one with her hand on the detonator. In the dead of night, while Liam slept the sound, untroubled sleep of the morally bankrupt, Ilara's mind was a whirlwind of cold, calculated activity. The guest room became her war room. With his laptop, which she could now access using a password she'd seen him type, the name of his first pet, a detail she'd lovingly remembered, she began her work. She wasn't looking for more evidence of the affair. She had all the proof she needed. She was looking for weaknesses, for the structural pillars holding up the edifice of his life. She downloaded copies of his financial records, noting his risky investments and a business loan he'd co-signed with his partner, Mark. She found emails detailing a project he'd taken sole credit for, a project his subordinate had actually masterminded. She delved into the life of the mistress, Chloe, using her name to find her social media profiles and her employer's website. Chloe was a marketing manager at a rival firm, a fact that was both a damning conflict of interest and a delicious opportunity. Ilara's revenge would not be a crime of passion. There would be no screaming matches or smashed photo frames. It would be a meticulous, multi-pronged campaign designed to dismantle his world piece by piece. She would target his career, his finances, his reputation, and the illicit relationship that had cost her everything. She created a timeline, a flowchart of actions and anticipated reactions. It was a blueprint for annihilation, designed by the one person who knew exactly where to strike to make the whole structure collapse. Her performance became a masterpiece of duplicity. Ilara amplified her role as the perfect wife, turning her devotion into a disarming camouflage. She was more attentive than ever, her tenderness a silken sheath hiding a blade of steel. She would pack his lunch for work, tucking in a small note that read, "Thinking of you," a gesture that now felt like a taunt only she could understand. She planned a lavish dinner party for Liam and his colleagues, playing the part of the charming, supportive hostess. She listened intently as his boss praised Liam's unflinching integrity, her smile never wavering, all the while knowing she possessed the proof to shatter that image completely. This calculated affection served a dual purpose. For Liam, it was the ultimate reassurance. His angel was still his, her love a constant he could rely on while he juggled his secret life. He was lulled into a state of absolute security. For Ilara, every feigned kiss and hollow, "I love you," was a fresh application of fuel to her inner fire. It was a form of self-flagellation, a constant reminder of the depth of his betrayal. The intimacy she forced herself to perform was a violation, but it was also a source of strength, solidifying her resolve. She was a spy in her own home, a saboteur in her own bed. He thought he was playing a game, but she was the one controlling the board, and his perfect, loyal wife was her most valuable piece. Ilara chose her first target carefully. It had to be small enough to go unnoticed by Liam as an attack, yet significant enough to plant the first seed of chaos in his well-ordered world. His career was his greatest pride, so that is where she began. Liam was heading a competitive bid for a major contract, a deal that would secure his promotion. He had bragged for weeks about a unique financial model he'd developed that gave his company the edge. Using a prepaid burner phone and a public library computer, Alara drafted a vague but tantalizing anonymous email. She sent it to the primary contact at the bidding company's main rival. It contained no sensitive data, nothing that could be traced back to her or Liam's files. It simply hinted at a novel, aggressive financing approach from Liam's firm and suggested they might want to reevaluate the long-term risk factors in their own bid. It was just enough to spark curiosity and paranoia. 2 days later, Liam came home fuming. The rival company had unexpectedly submitted a revised, more aggressive proposal at the 11th hour, undercutting his. The deal wasn't lost yet, but it was in jeopardy, and his sure win had turned into a frantic scramble. He paced the living room, ranting about corporate espionage, about a mole in his department. Alara listened with feigned sympathy, rubbing his shoulders and murmuring words of comfort, her touch a chilling counterpoint to the quiet, triumphant thrill humming in her veins. He had no idea the mole was sleeping in his bed. With Liam unsettled and his focus fractured, Alara began to subtly manipulate his immediate environment, turning his home from a sanctuary into a place of quiet confusion. She was his angel, and angels, he believed, were incapable of deceit. She used this faith to her advantage, making him question his own mind. It started with small things. She'd move the keys from the hook by the door to the bowl on the console table. "But I always put them on the hook," he'd insist, looking confused. "You must have forgotten, darling." "You've been so stressed," she'd reply, her voice laced with gentle concern. She began to gaslight him in subtle, deniable ways. "I'm so looking forward to dinner with the Hendersons tonight," she'd say cheerfully. When he looked at her blankly, claiming he knew nothing about it, she would feign surprise. "But you told me you arranged it last week." "Liam, are you feeling all right? Your memory seems a bit foggy lately." He'd check his calendar, find nothing, and be left with a nagging feeling of unease. He started misplacing important documents for work, only for Alara to find them in illogical places, like the linen closet. "You're working too hard," she'd coo, handing him the folder. "You need to let me take care of you." His confidence, once rock solid, began to show hairline cracks. He felt increasingly off balance, his world tilting in ways he couldn't explain. And through it all, his angel was there, his only constant, his pillar of support, all the while orchestrating his slow descent into self-doubt. Having sown chaos in Liam's professional life and his mind, Alara turned her cold gaze toward the other woman. Her objective was not to confront Chloe, but to dismantle her life from a distance, turning Liam's escape into another source of stress. From her late-night research, Alara knew Chloe was ambitious and image-conscious, working as a marketing manager at a direct competitor to Liam's firm. This was a flagrant breach of ethics for both of them. Using another anonymous email account, Alara sent a carefully worded message to the head of HR at Chloe's company. The email didn't make direct accusations. Instead, it innocently praised Chloe's close networking relationship with a senior manager at a rival firm, Liam's firm. It hinted that she had remarkable access to competitive insights and wondered if this was part of a bold new intercompany collaboration. The language was corporate and complimentary, but the insinuation of corporate espionage was unmistakable. It was enough to trigger an internal review. Simultaneously, Alara used information gleaned from Chloe's public social media to create a minor social disruption. She sent an anonymous tip to a local gossip blogger about Chloe being seen with a prominent, very married executive, ensuring the description was just vague enough to be deniable but specific enough to start whispers in Chloe's social circle. Within 2 weeks, Chloe was facing a stressful HR inquiry at work and fielding awkward questions from her friends. The affair, once a thrilling secret, was now a liability. She became paranoid and demanding, her calls to Liam filled with panic instead of passion. The perfect mistress was becoming a perfect nightmare. Liam was now a man under siege. His big contract was on shaky ground. He was beginning to doubt his own memory, and his mistress was becoming increasingly volatile. He was adrift in a sea of anxiety, and Alara positioned herself as his only lighthouse. This was the moment she transitioned from subtle sabotage to direct manipulation. He would come to her, confiding his troubles, and she, his trusted angel, would offer the perfect advice designed to lead him further toward ruin. When he fretted about his partner Mark's conservative approach to salvaging the jeopardized contract, Alara stroked his ego. "Mark has always been too cautious, darling," she said softly. "Perhaps it's time for a bold move. You need to show them you're the real leader." Spurred by her words, Liam bypassed Mark and made a high-risk decision that ultimately backfired, creating a deep rift with his business partner. When he complained about Chloe's panicked calls, Alara played the part of the wise, if unknowing, counselor. "This woman, whoever she is, sounds unstable," she advised with a thoughtful frown. "A man in your position can't afford that kind of drama. You need to be ruthless. Cut her off cleanly before she causes real trouble." Believing her to be his only true ally, Liam took her advice. He sent Chloe a curt, dismissive text, ending their affair without explanation. He was trying to regain control, but every move he made was a thread in the web Alara was weaving. He sawed through the supports of his own life, all while believing it was his own idea. The time for gaslighting and subtle manipulation was ending. Now, Alara began the methodical process of dismantling his confidence by confronting him with cold, hard facts. She chose her moments carefully, never when she was emotional, always when she was calm, presenting her evidence like a prosecutor in a courtroom. One evening, as he recounted his long day at the office, she waited for him to finish before speaking. "That's strange," she said, her voice even and quiet. "I called your office line around 7 to see if you wanted me to save you dinner. Your secretary said you'd left for the day at 5. She held his gaze, her expression not accusatory, just questioning. He stammered, inventing a story about stopping to see a client, his eyes darting around the room. A few days later, she approached him with a credit card statement. "Liam, I was just going over our finances," she began, her tone practical. "I don't recognize this charge from the Sapphire Lounge last month. It was on a Wednesday. You told me you were at a conference in Boston." She had already cross-referenced the date with his travel records. He hadn't been in Boston. Each confrontation was a small, precise strike. She wasn't revealing that she knew about the affair, only that she knew he was a liar. He couldn't dismiss her concerns as jealousy or hysteria. She was armed with data, with his own inconsistencies. The illusion of his cleverness, his ability to manage his double life, was shattering. He began to look at his gentle, simple wife with a flicker of something new: fear. The perfect stage for Liam's public execution was his parents' 40th wedding anniversary party. It was a grand affair, held at a lavish country club, attended by their entire family and a wide circle of influential friends and business associates. Liam was set to give the keynote toast, a tribute to his parents' enduring love and loyalty. He stood at the podium, a glass of champagne in hand, the picture of a devoted son and successful family man. As he spoke about the importance of trust and fidelity, Alara, seated at the head table, calmly connected her phone to the venue's large projection screen, which had earlier been displaying a slideshow of family photos. At first, no one noticed, but as Liam reached the crescendo of his speech, the screen behind him flickered to life. The smiling family photos were replaced by a screenshot of a text message exchange. "Can't wait to see you tonight. My angel has no idea," read a message from Liam. The reply, from Chloe, was equally incriminating. The room fell silent. Liam, confused by the sudden hush, turned around. His face went white. The slideshow continued methodically. A photo of him and Chloe kissing outside her apartment building. A hotel receipt. A screenshot of a flight booking for 2. On a weekend, he was supposedly on a solo fishing trip. There was no shouting, no screaming. Just the cold, digital evidence of his betrayal, projected for everyone he respected to see. Alara sat perfectly still, her expression serene, as she pulled the pin on the grenade that blew his world apart. For Chloe, the public exposé was a catastrophe. Her name and face were now irrevocably linked to a humiliating scandal. In the immediate, chaotic aftermath of the party, Liam, in a desperate, pathetic attempt at self-preservation, did exactly what Alara had predicted. He threw Chloe to the wolves. His phone calls to concerned family and colleagues were filled with a new, revised narrative. Chloe was an unstable opportunist who had pursued him relentlessly. He was the victim, a man who had made a single, terrible mistake under immense pressure. He painted her as a predator and himself as the prey. The story was flimsy, but in his world, a man's denial often carried more weight than a woman's truth. The fallout from the anonymous HR tip at Chloe's company, which had been a quiet internal matter, now exploded. Faced with a public scandal involving a direct competitor, her firm terminated her employment immediately, citing a morals clause in her contract. Her carefully curated social circle evaporated, her friends distancing themselves from the drama and shame. She tried to contact Liam, her calls and texts a frantic mix of fury and pleading, but he blocked her number. She was completely alone, her career in ruins and her reputation destroyed. She had been a willing participant in the affair, but she had not anticipated the ruthlessness of Liam's cowardice, nor the ice-cold precision of the wife she had never met. She was merely collateral damage, a secondary target obliterated to ensure the primary target's total isolation. The public humiliation was only the beginning. Like a controlled demolition, the pillars of Liam's life buckled and collapsed in a sequence Alara had meticulously planned. The scandal gave his professional rivals the ammunition they needed. His business partner, Mark, already alienated by Liam's reckless decisions, initiated a buyout of his shares in their company, citing a breach of trust and conduct unbecoming of a partner. His boss, embarrassed by the public display and facing pressure from the board, asked for his resignation. The career he had built with swagger and ambition was over in a matter of days. His social standing crumbled just as quickly. Friends who had witnessed the cold, hard evidence at the party could not look him in the eye. They had seen not only his betrayal but also the quiet, terrifying power of the wife he had underestimated. They chose their side, and it wasn't his. His family was shattered. His parents, whose celebration of loyalty he had desecrated, were deeply ashamed. He was an outcast, the subject of hushed, pitying conversations. He lost his company, his title, his friends, and the respect of his family. He would call Alara, leaving rambling voicemails that swung between rage, disbelief, and pathetic pleas for her to stop. But she never answered. He was left alone in the rubble of the life he had so arrogantly taken for granted, a king deposed, left with nothing but the echoes of his own lies. Her revenge was complete, a perfect, all-encompassing ruin. She agreed to meet him one last time. Not in their home, which was now just a house for sale, but in a sterile, impersonal coffee shop. He looked like a stranger, haggard, diminished, the arrogance gone from his eyes, replaced by a hollow desperation. He didn't understand. He thought this was about the affair, an act of passionate, uncontrolled rage. He began to apologize, to beg, to promise he would change. Alara let him talk, sipping her black coffee, her expression unreadable. When he finally ran out of words, she spoke, her voice calm and devoid of emotion. "You think this was about jealousy," she stated, not asked. "You think I did this because you broke my heart." She shook her head slowly. "You didn't just break my heart, Liam. You erased the person I was. The woman who loved you, who trusted you, who would have done anything for you. You killed her. You were careless, and you killed your angel." She leaned forward slightly, her eyes locking onto his. "And I am what grew in her place." In that moment, she delivered the final blow, the true punishment. She detailed her plan, from the anonymous email about the contract to her manipulation of his paranoia, to her calculated takedown of Chloe. She explained how she had used his own ego, his own lies, against him. The horror dawning on his face was not about the loss of his job or his reputation. It was the soul-crushing realization that the gentle, simple woman he had so easily deceived was, in fact, a brilliant, ruthless strategist who had calmly and intellectually orchestrated his complete and total destruction. She stood up to leave. "That is your punishment," she said softly, "knowing you were destroyed not by my weakness, but by my strength." Walking away from the coffee shop, Elara felt a profound and unsettling quietness in her soul. She reflected on the woman she had been, the one who found purpose in the warmth of a shared home, whose greatest ambition was to be the soft place for her husband to land. That woman felt like a character from a novel she'd once read, a gentle, naive protagonist she no longer recognized. She didn't mourn her, but she acknowledged her passing. The love she had felt for Liam had been a force of nature, a deep and powerful current. It was a love that built, nurtured, and forgave. But she now understood that any force so powerful, when betrayed, does not simply vanish. It transforms. Her capacity for absolute devotion had been the forge for her capacity for absolute destruction. The same meticulous attention to detail she once used to remember his favorite meals was repurposed to catalog his weaknesses. The same unwavering patience she had shown while listening to his problems was used to wait for the perfect moment to strike. Love had not turned to hate. Hate was a hot, messy emotion. What she had felt was colder, pure. It was a conversion of energy, from creation to demolition. He had prayed for an angel to save him, but his sins had been too great. And so, the universe had not sent an avenger. It had simply allowed the angel he destroyed to become his punishment, a divine consequence born not of heaven or hell, but of the wreckage of a broken heart. Elara stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, leaving the ghost of her husband and the ruins of their life behind her. She did not feel the triumphant thrill she had anticipated, nor the hollow emptiness she had feared. Instead, she felt a quiet finality, like a soldier laying down her arms after a long and brutal war. Revenge had been her weapon. It was a tool she had picked up in the immediate, desperate aftermath of her world's collapse. It had given her focus, a purpose beyond the pain. She had wielded it not with passion, but with the cold, detached precision of a surgeon, cutting away the diseased parts of her life. And now, its purpose was served. A weapon, once its target is eliminated, is just a heavy weight to carry. She could finally set it down. She was walking away, not into a new, sunlit life. She was not so naive as to believe it would be that simple, but into a future that was a blank slate. For the first time in her adult life, her identity was not tied to him. She was not his wife, not his angel, and no longer his punisher. The betrayal had scarred her, but it had also taught her a vital lesson about her own strength. She had discovered reserves of intelligence, resilience, and ruthlessness she never knew she possessed. She walked on, a solitary figure against the city's skyline, not broken, but forged anew. She was alone, but for the first time in a long time, she was free. The weapon called revenge had saved her, and now she no longer needed it.